One woman. One constitution. What began as a simple hearing became a turning point in American democracy, proving that real power lies not in politics, but in truth. If you believe the Constitution belongs to every American, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more real moments that reveal the truth behind power. The lights of the Senate Judiciary Committee room blazed down on Governor Ron DeSantis as cameras clicked from every corner. What was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing had turned into the most talked about moment in Washington. Across from him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, a sharp, fearless attorney-turned-lawmaker with a reputation for dismantling weak legal arguments. The issue on the table: the constitutionality of DeSantis's controversial state election integrity law, which critics said made it harder for minorities and seniors to vote. The air was tense. Even veteran senators leaned forward in their seats. Reporters whispered, knowing something historic was about to unfold. Crockett had come prepared, not just with passion, but with precision. Every document, every court ruling, every constitutional clause was at her fingertips. "Governor," she began calmly, "you've claimed your law strengthens democracy. I'd like to test that claim against the Constitution itself." DeSantis adjusted his tie, giving a confident smile. "Representative, Florida's law is fully consistent with Article 1, Section 4. The states are empowered to regulate their own elections." Crockett didn't flinch. "Correct, unless those regulations violate the 15th Amendment, which explicitly prohibits discrimination in voting," she replied. The room grew silent. For the first time, DeSantis realized this wasn't going to be a political debate. It was about the Constitution, and he was up against someone who knew it inside out. The clash between state sovereignty and federal voting rights had begun. By the time Jasmine Crockett began her questioning, the entire room could sense it. This was no ordinary political exchange. This was a constitutional showdown between two of America's sharpest legal minds. Crockett, a former civil rights attorney from Texas, had built her career defending the right to vote for people who couldn't afford to lose it. Her proposed Federal Voter Protection Act wasn't born from theory. It came from years spent in courtrooms and community centers, fighting for fairness. "This isn't about party," she said. "It's about principle. Every citizen deserves a fair shot at the ballot box." Governor Ron DeSantis, however, was no lightweight. A Harvard Law graduate, Navy veteran, and skilled debater, he came armed with statistics, charts, and confidence. "State sovereignty is the foundation of our democracy," he argued. "The Constitution gives states the authority to set their own election rules. Florida's model protects integrity, and it's working." He gestured toward the data behind him. "Turnout hasn't dropped. Fraud is minimal. The system works." Republican senators nodded approvingly. For a moment, it looked like DeSantis was winning the narrative. Then Chairman Whitehouse spoke. "Representative Crockett, you have the floor." Crockett leaned forward, voice steady and deliberate. "Governor, you agree that state sovereignty isn't absolute. It exists within the limits of the Constitution, correct?" DeSantis smiled. "Of course. And when those limits are crossed," she continued, "who decides what's reasonable, the states themselves or the courts?" "The courts," he replied confidently. Crockett gave a knowing nod. That single admission, quiet, almost unnoticed, was the first thread in the argument she was about to unravel. The tension in the chamber thickened as Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned closer to her microphone. Her tone stayed calm, almost surgical, but everyone in the room could feel the shift. "Governor," she began, "you've cited the Constitution's Elections Clause, Article 1, Section 4, giving states authority to regulate elections. But you conveniently left out the second half of that clause." She picked up a worn copy of the Constitution, its edges highlighted and bookmarked. It says, "But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations." In other words, state power over elections exists only until Congress decides to act. Isn't that right? DeSantis hesitated. "In a limited sense, yes, but..." Crockett cut in gently. "So by your own admission, Congress has both the right and the responsibility to intervene when state laws risk violating the rights of voters." The governor's jaw tightened. That's a matter of interpretation. Crockett smiled faintly. No, Governor. That's the text. A low murmur spread across the room. Even the senators sitting behind DeSantis exchanged uneasy glances. The governor had walked straight into her logic, and there was no easy way out. She pressed forward. Now, if a state passes laws that disproportionately burden certain voters, say, the elderly or the poor, does that raise a 15th Amendment concern? DeSantis shifted in his chair. If intentional discrimination could be proven, perhaps. Perhaps. Crockett repeated softly. Governor, intent is one thing. But the effect of a law can still violate constitutional protections, even without explicit bias. That's been reaffirmed in multiple Supreme Court rulings, including Shelby County and Harper v. Virginia Board of Elections. Surely you're familiar with those. DeSantis exhaled, saying nothing. Crockett continued, her voice gaining quiet strength. You've built your argument on state power. I'm building mine on constitutional equality, the principle that no state law can stand if it suppresses the right to vote. The framers made that clear, and you just confirmed it. The governor looked down at his papers, suddenly aware that his confident defense was slipping away. And in that moment, the entire balance of the hearing shifted, from politics to principle, from argument to accountability. By now, every camera in the Senate chamber was locked on Jasmine Crockett. Even those who came expecting routine political theater could feel it. Something historic was unfolding. She opened a thick folder marked Exhibits. Governor, I'd like to enter into the record these sworn affidavits from Florida voters directly impacted by your election law, she said, her voice unwavering. The first name she read was Mary Wilson, a 78-year-old from Gadsden County. She had to travel 67 miles round trip to get a new state ID after the one she'd used for decades was no longer valid. She doesn't drive. She spent $120, nearly a week's groceries, just to vote. Governor, do you consider that an acceptable burden? DeSantis cleared his throat. Representative, isolated cases don't prove systemic discrimination. Our law includes exceptions. Crockett nodded politely, but she wasn't done. Then let's talk about James Hernandez, a paramedic who worked 12-hour shifts. He used to vote at a drop box near his station until your law restricted drop box hours to 9 to 5, the exact hours he's at work. He lost his right to vote because he couldn't get there in time. She paused for a moment, letting the silence land. Governor, that's not theory. That's a citizen, doing everything right, denied a constitutional right. Reporters typed rapidly. Senators leaned in. Even the cameras zoomed closer. Then she revealed the final blow, a chart stamped with the Florida Division of Election seal. According to your own office, between 2000 and 2023, Florida recorded 153 cases of voter fraud out of more than 50 million ballots cast. That's 0.0003%. Almost zero. Yet you've used that number to justify laws that block thousands from voting. How is that constitutional? DeSantis tried to pivot. Even one fraudulent vote undermines confidence in democracy, he said firmly. Crockett's reply came sharp and clear. And one citizen denied their right to vote destroys it. You've traded real rights for imaginary fears, and under oath, Governor, you just confirmed it. The entire room froze. Even DeSantis's supporters fell silent. For the first time, the governor's confidence faltered. In that single exchange, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She exposed the flaw at the heart of the governor's defense. And she did it with nothing but truth, law, and courage. When the hearing finally ended, the silence in the chamber said everything. Governor Ron DeSantis, once confident, commanding, left the room without a word. And Representative Jasmine Crockett had done what few ever manage in Washington. She didn't just win a debate, she changed it. Within hours, the exchange dominated national headlines. The Washington Post called it, "Crockett dismantles DeSantis using his own words." Even conservative outlets admitted the skill on display. The National Review described it as a masterclass in constitutional argument. For Crockett, it wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the principle that democracy depends not on power, but on fairness. Days later, DeSantis appeared on television with a noticeably softer tone. "I stand by Florida's election integrity laws," he said, "but I agree, every eligible voter must be able to participate." It wasn't a full retreat, but it was an unmistakable shift. Behind the scenes, Florida quietly amended parts of its law, expanding drop-box hours and simplifying ID renewals for seniors. Across the country, lawmakers began re-examining their own state restrictions, hoping to avoid a Crockett-style takedown in their next hearing. Crockett's Federal Voter Protection Act gained bipartisan traction. Legal scholars hailed it as one of the most balanced voting rights proposals in decades, federal protection with respect for state control. Months later, a Georgetown law professor put it simply: Crockett didn't just argue law. She reminded the nation what the Constitution was meant to do: protect every American equally. And years after that hearing, when a new voting rights case reached the Supreme Court, a justice cited her words directly. "The Constitution does not protect only the convenient voters, it protects all voters." For millions who watched that moment, it wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder that courage, preparation, and truth can still move a nation. And that one voice, calm, focused, and fearless, can still hold power accountable.